Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Libertarian Party interview series. My name is Steven Nekhaila, chairman of the Libertarian National Committee, and I'm pleased to welcome our guest, Professor Jiang, who's joining us from China. Professor Jiang became very popular recently due to his predictions of the pending war in Iran. And has a YouTube channel, Predictive History, which I'm personally a big fan of. And so I'm very pleased to welcome Professor Jiang here. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks so much, Stephen.
So I wanted to ask you off the bat, Professor, your predictions of the essentially the U.S. strikes in Iran and the Israeli-U.S. Conflict in the Middle East that's continuing to be ongoing and could be a potential flashpoint for World War III. I wanted to get your thoughts on where we go from here, but I also wanted to ask you, how did you know it was going to happen? How did you come up with the formula to essentially predict what was going to happen a year ahead of time? And that, of course, brought you to a lot of YouTube fame, and now you have a lot of eyes and ears on you, and I think it's well deserved. But I was curious to know what your thoughts were leading up to that.
Yeah, so the big clue for me was that in January 2020, President Donald Trump, in his first term, ordered the assassination of General Soleimani, who is the Iranian ambassador in the Middle East. He's the one who runs the Shia militias in Iraq. He is the go-between for Hezbollah and Hamas. So he's a very important figure. He's the de facto ambassador for Iran in the Middle East. And when you do that, when you assassinate an ambassador, that's a de facto declaration of war. And we've seen this throughout history. So the Mongols will come invade you if you kill one of the envoys. Persia launched a massive invasion of Greece because Sparta and Athens famously threw their ambassadors down a well. So in the Middle East, when you do that, that's a declaration of war. So then I started to ask myself, why would the United States declare war on Iran? And it turned out that there are actually a lot of reasons. One of the major reasons is that Iran has access to a lot of oil. Geopolitically, it's very important. It is the center of the world in terms of global trade. The Strait of Hormuz, it controls the Strait of Hormuz. So if we were to close down the Strait of Hormuz, it would shut down a third of oil transportation in the world, thus devastating the economies of China, South Korea, and Japan. And there's also the Saudi Arabia factor, where Saudi Arabia is very close to Donald Trump, but Saudi Arabia and Iranian are major geopolitical rivals. Then, of course, there's the fact that 1979, the Iranians overthrew the Shah, and that diminished American influence in Iran. So I think that the Americans have always been trying to get back into Iran. So there are tons and tons of geopolitical reasons. But my conclusion was that if Donald Trump won the election in 2020, in November, then he would have ordered an invasion of Iran. And when he lost, and I asked myself, well, what's the likelihood of him winning in 2024? And then I came to the conclusion that given Biden's presidency, it was very likely that Trump would win the election. And then I could make the decision that Trump would eventually strike against Iran. And that's my reasoning.
As libertarians, I think we're unique in the sense that we tend to study a lot of history, a lot of economics. We consider ourselves Austrian school economists. We're very privy on the Federal Reserve System and, of course, the global banking system. And one question that I've had for a long time, and I see the writing on the wall, when Putin talks of a multipolar world, and I do see the rise of BRICS in the East, and essentially the decoupling of the West, the decoupling of the U.S. as a reserve currency, and essentially a separate system of world currency. They have their own World Bank, they have their own IMF, and they seem to be working more interoperably without the West. And I wanted to ask you, where do you predict the next several years, even decades to come going? What is going to be the fate for the West, and is there going to be a rise in the East? And can there be a multipolar world, or will this lead to global conflict?
So when Putin talks about a multipolar world, he's really talking about the end of the American empire. Because as you mentioned, the United States has the Federal Reserve System. And the problem will probably central banking system is that you have to be all expensive. You have to consolidate wealth. You cannot allow for any dissent because a private central banking system relies heavily on the creation of debt. And if there are alternatives where people can invest in other nations, then that system doesn't really work. In fact, it's very likely the system will go bankrupt. And that's why the United States has been fighting these wars all around the world for the past 20 years, the so-called war on terror, right? So you look at nations like Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria. What distinguishes them is they don't have a private central banking system that the United States can come and co-opt, okay? So Iran also doesn't have a private central banking system, and that's why I think the United States is intent on war against Iran. And so the United States cannot afford a multipolar world. Right now, America is $37 trillion in debt. It can only sustain itself if people continue to buy U.S. treasuries. In fact, the central banking system, the Federal Reserve, is a Ponzi scheme. And so the United States is now sort of desperate. I mean, I hate to say this, but the United States has absolutely no choice but to maintain hegemony. Otherwise, the entire Ponzi scheme, the entire pyramid scheme collapses.
And you know, that worries me. And I think one of the things that libertarians have been very concerned about, especially over the past, of course, since the invasion of the second invasion of Ukraine by Russia, the special military operation, but of course, our government and the West's participation in funding that conflict. It seems to be on both sides of this conflict, they're viewing this as an existential issue. On one side, the West is willing to fight the Russians down to the very last Ukrainian, and the Russians are saying, look, we're not going to back down. We will win this conflict. We view it as a national security issue, and you know, we will win. So if both sides are saying the same thing, does this escalate to, you know, is this particular nuclear flashpoint? Do you see this war ending somewhere? You know, where are we going with this conflict, and is there an end in sight?
Yeah, so I think the situation in Ukraine right now, it's pretty stark. And Russia has won the war. I know that Russia has not completed all its strategic objectives, and Ukraine still has a lot of manpower and has a lot of resources. It has the total backing of the American empire and NATO. But what Clausewitz tells us is that war is the battle to diminish the others' will to fight, okay? And the reality is, if you look at the front lines, the Russians are highly motivated. They're highly innovative. They've mastered drone warfare. They feel as though this is a religious crusade to save Russian civilization. And on the Ukrainian side, you have mass desertions. You have like tens of thousands who are deserting. You know, in Provolsk, it seems as though the Russians have encircled 10,000 Ukrainian soldiers. And it seems as though it is very likely that all 10,000 will have to surrender, which is exactly what Putin wants, because if you do that, it's a tremendous public relations win, and it sort of like diminishes the morale of the Ukrainian side. And it makes them much more willing to surrender or desert. So I think from a military perspective, Ukrainians have lost the war. The problem, as you say, is that the Americans, NATO, cannot afford to lose this war. Because if they admit defeat, if they have a peace treaty with Putin, then there's going to be a full accounting for the public. People are going to recognize the number of casualties in Ukraine. People are going to see the amount of resources, the amount of debt that NATO, America has invested in Ukraine. And and I don't think people can possibly imagine the amount of resources NATO has put into Ukraine. Because from NATO's perspective, as you say, this is an exercise war. It's all or nothing. So, I mean, NATO has possibly put in hundreds of billions of dollars. And these NATO countries, mainly France, Germany, and Britain, cannot withstand that sort of debt. So if there's a war, there's a peace treaty, and Britain, France, and Germany are forced to admit that, listen, we've invested hundreds of billions of dollars into Ukraine, and this is not recoverable, then these governments collapse. You will have major political revolution in Europe. So NATO cannot afford to lose this war. Whether or not this goes into nuclear conflict, I think the answer is no. And the reason why is that Russia doesn't need to use nuclear weapons to win this war. This war is a war of attrition. Russia uses trench artillery warfare, and it's a master of that. And so this warfare, it's really slow, it's methodical, it's calculating. They do this to minimize casualties on both sides, right? This is to minimize civilian destruction of civilian infrastructure, because at the end of the day, Russia sees Eastern Ukraine, especially Donbass, the Donetsk, as part of Russian civilization. It wants to be able to govern and manage the territory after this war ends. So it's been very methodical. It's reduced civilian casualties. It's reduced as much infrastructure, as much destruction of critical infrastructure as much as possible. So Russia fights this war really slowly. It's a slow grind, and so you won't have a precipitating moment when Russia feels it has to use nuclear weapons. If Russia doesn't use nuclear weapons, Europe cannot use nuclear weapons, because if you're fighting this war in Ukraine, far away from your population centers, what rationale do you have to use nuclear weapons, right? So I think what's going to happen is that this will be a slow bleed. I think that Europe will slowly invest more and more into Ukraine. It'll be a mission creep, where right now they have special forces, but eventually they'll start reinforcing the Ukrainian front lines with mercenaries, and there'll be mission creep. And I think that the climactic battle will be Odessa. I think that in maybe 2 to 3 years' time, Russia will encircle Odessa, and NATO will make its last stand in Odessa. And because NATO does not have the manpower to fight Russia, then Europe is forced to introduce a draft, and this will cause social and political revolutions within Europe, because these young men in Europe don't really see a point of fighting Russia. Russia is not a threat to Europe. Everyone understands this, but Europe is a threat to NATO. Russia is a threat to NATO, and Europe and Russia is a threat to the hegemony of the American empire. And so, yeah, I mean, like, unfortunately, the way that things stand, it's pretty obvious what will happen.
And speaking of hegemony, it seems like there may be a Monroe Doctrine conflict taking place in Venezuela, and I wonder if that has to do with Venezuela's close ties, of course, with China and Russia. Perhaps they see it as an oil depot, or perhaps just an easy target for a future conflict to get it out of the way, because I don't see how, and I'm not sure what the U.S. is thinking, or if the United States is that cavalier to consider fighting a war on 3 fronts. I wanted to get your take on the Venezuelan conflict, but also Taiwan and China and that question, because it seems to me that the U.S. has for a while been ambiguous about its position in that conflict, whether or not it would defend Taiwan. But it seems that since Trump has been president, they've taken a stance. It seems like quite a bit for semiconductors and potential flashpoint against a superpower. So what are your thoughts on that? Is that something that's going to break out over the coming years, or is that just posturing?
Sure. Okay. So from a geopolitical perspective, I don't understand Venezuela, because I feel as though the United States and Israel have committed to this war in Iran. And geopolitically, that makes sense, because Iran is the center of the world. So if you look at Russia's trade network, the North-South corridor that runs through Iran, look at China's Belt and Road Initiative, right? It runs through Iran. Europe has something called the Europe, Middle East, India trade corridor. So it's really the center of global trade. So it makes sense geopolitically to want to control Iran. But then the question then is, okay, if you have made a decision to eventually go after Iran and try regime change there, why would then you lose focus and focus on Venezuela? Now, you can say it's for oil, but sorry, but Iran has a lot of oil. And the oil in the Middle East, especially Saudi Arabia, it's actually much more accessible and easy to transport than the oil in Venezuela. The reason why the oil in Venezuela has not been fully developed, even though it has the world's largest proven reserves of oil, is that it is actually extremely capital intensive to dig this oil and to refine this oil. Also, like, if you're interested in this oil, Venezuela is perfectly happy to sign a deal with you, okay? And Venezuela is perfectly happy to sell this oil to you on the cheap. So the oil doesn't make sense. And then you're like, okay, well, then it's to neuter Russia and China. But, listen, you have something called the Monroe Doctrine, and all great powers recognize that the Western Hemisphere is American territory. And so Russia and China are not interested in interference in the Western Hemisphere. And if you're really interested in neutering Russia and China, then Iran makes a lot more sense. So from a geopolitical perspective, I have difficulties explaining Venezuela. Okay, so I think what's happening in Venezuela, I have an explanation. Okay, so I think when Trump says that we're concerned about drug smuggling in Venezuela and Mexico in the Western Hemisphere, I don't think he's lying. I think that for Trump, the real enemy is not Iran, it's not Russia, it's not China. The real enemy is the global deep state, the global financial establishment. And then you ask yourself, okay, then if that is the case, if the city of London, if Wall Street, if these European elites, these American elites, what is it that binds them together? What is their main way of making money? Well, then it's drug smuggling, right? So historically, there are three ways that you can make a lot of money for yourself. Okay, the first is debt, so finance and gambling. The second is slavery, so human trafficking, organ harvesting, slavery. Okay, and the third is drug smuggling. And so when Britain launched the Opium Wars, it created this massive international network of drug smuggling that included the banks. Okay, so we know that HSBC, Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation, it's a major major money laundering operation. It's been ever since its inception, right? So when Trump says that we're going after the drug smuggling operation of the world, what he's really saying is we're going after the global deep state. We're going after CIA, right? Because which organization is the biggest drug runner in the world? The CIA. Okay, so in other words, I see what's going on in Venezuela as a hidden civil war in the United States between different factions of the deep state, right? So if you're the U.S. military and you're blowing up these fishing vessels, that's kind of weird, right? Because these bombs are very expensive. These fishing vessels are not that expensive. Why are you targeting innocent civilians? Also, remember, this is the military, so they have lots of rules of engagement. If they do not believe there's credible cause to attack these fishing vessels, they wouldn't do so. I mean, these are soldiers. They have morality, they have integrity, they have honor. So I think they do believe that these fishing vessels are transporting drugs, and this is maybe the shot heard around the world. It's just the first shot in this war. Trump has talked about Mexico, going after the Mexican cartels, and so I think that's what's happening. I don't think that Trump will launch a full-scale invasion of Venezuela because it's going to blow up in his face, right? It'll be like another Vietnam. Venezuela is a very mountainous country. Venezuela has preparations for a guerrilla warfare in case of an American invasion. America doesn't have the manpower or the political will to invade Venezuela. But what Trump can do is constantly threaten drug trade routes to make it expensive for the global deep state to continue its drug smuggling operations. If it does that, then I think the global deep state will be under a lot of pressure. So that's my theory of what's going on. I have absolutely no idea, but I can't explain this otherwise.
No, it's very interesting, and that is a very interesting topic as well. And I would like your opinion on what do you believe is the current apparatus of the deep state? I know Ron Paul talked about the deep state for many years. Sometimes it's used to refer to bureaucrats that are deeply ingrained, and other times it can be used to describe things like secret societies like the Bavarian Illuminati, or even Skull and Bones, which is the postgraduate society at Yale. And how much influence and how entrenched are these networks, and how global does it go? Is this something? Is there truly no nationality to these players? And if so, if there is a breakout between the West versus BRICS, do they pick a side, or does it not matter to them? I mean,
yeah. So I think there are many different facets to global deep state. You obviously have these organizations, right? The CIA, the NSA, the FBI. You also have these major bureaucracies, the EU. You also have these major education institutions, Harvard, Yale, the Ivy League, also LSE, Oxford, Cambridge, okay, University of Paris, Sorbonne. So you have these university institutions. You have families, the so-called 13 families that trace their origins way back to the Roman Empire. But I think that today, the main institution of the deep state are secret societies. And so let me explain why. I think that secret societies have three characteristics. The first is the ability to maintain secrecy, right? Because once you enter it, it's like you swear to maintain secrecy on the risk of death, right? That's number one. Number two is cohesion, right? These people trust each other. And the third is coordination. They're able to work together very well secretly. So why this is important is that today, if you look at the world structurally, it's very hard to get things done because for three reasons. First is that you have the over-bureaucratization of society, right? So you look at the federal government and you look at how it's grown these past 100 years. The problem with bureaucracy, of course, is that all these departments are siloed off from each other. Everything is compartmentalized. It's always need to know. So no one knows what each other department is doing. It's very hard to get things done. Bureaucracy has made society very cumbersome, right? But if you're a secret society, you can actually navigate bureaucracies because you have this organization above bureaucracy. Okay, so that's number one. You have the over-bureaucratization of society. Second thing is you have the rise of the individual, which means the atomization of society, right? So in these individuals, yeah, it's great. You have all this freedom, but you're not able to work with other people. So if you have an organization that's able to coordinate, then no matter how small they are, they're still more effective than individuals working alone, right? And the third thing is globalization, transnationalism, right? So people don't have as much ethnic identity as they used to before. And so secret society sort of is a parasite on society because it's able to solve all three of these structural problems: bureaucratization, individualization, and globalization. And that's why I think global societies are specifically powerful today. So you look at like the Mormons, the Jesuits, the Freemasons, people called the Sabbatean Frankists, Christian Zionists, they're all heavily embedded in the NSA, the CIA, the FBI, basically the Pentagon, America's national security apparatus. So I think it's these secret societies that actually control the world. And it's dangerous because what allows these secret societies to thrive and to coordinate is their eschatology. So they're all interested in starting a third world war in order to create a world government or to have the Messiah come or to have the Messiah return. They're interested in building the third temple in Jerusalem, which means destroying the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is the third holiest site in the Islamic world. And they're all interested in digital currency and world government. Okay, so these societies are a threat to individual freedom around the world.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think just the trajectory of where we're heading really speaks to or seems to indicate that's I don't see us deviating from that course. It seems like at the current trajectory we are headed towards some kind of global conflict. And that begs the question of there's this fifth generational warfare where it might not be as obvious as say World War I or World War II, but a lot of it is psychological. A lot of it is manipulation. It seems to be. What do you think about where we're headed in terms of global conflict? Do you see World War III breaking out kinetically, or do you see this as sort of mostly a psychological operation or a hybrid? Where do we go from here, and what do you predict over the next several years?
Yeah, so I think in the age of nuclear weapons, a kinetic war is extremely unlikely. If Russia and NATO were to go at a slugfest, then the entire world is threatened, right? So it's much more likely that if there's kinetic war, it'll be against a non-nuclear power like Iran, right? So I see a U.S. invasion of Iran at some point. So I don't think nuclear powers will go to war because it can mean the destruction of humanity. So I think fifth generation warfare is much more likely. Okay, so it's important to understand some history. Okay, so the French Revolution marked a massive turning point in world history because during the French Revolution, the elite around the world recognized that, wow, the people can rise up and overthrow us and guillotine us. So let's, avoid that. So after the French Revolution, after the Napoleonic Wars, you had something called the Concert of Europe, which guaranteed peace in Europe for about 40, 50 years. And then you had the 1848 revolutions when the people were almost on the cusp of overthrowing the entire ancient regime in Europe. And then the elite was like, oh, wow, we can't have any peace anymore because then the people will rise up against us eventually. And that's why you have the lead up to World War One, right? Because it's either you send your people to die off in the trenches, or your people will rise up and overthrow you. And so that's World War One and World War Two. Now you have nuclear weapons. So if you send people off to die, there's always a risk of a nuclear war. So warfare is really about now the capacity to maintain control over your population and the capacity to diminish cohesion in other nations, right? So when Putin is funding this war in Ukraine, he's funding this on multiple fronts. He's funding it in Ukraine, on the front lines of Ukraine, but mainly he's funding it in the world media, right? In Europe, and that's why Putin is so supportive of these far right populist parties, because immigration is a wedge issue in Europe, right? So so that's the nature of warfare today, and so what you're trying to do really is trying to provoke a civil war. Now, what's interesting is that if you're the elite of a nation, civil war is also a possibility, because civil war is a mechanism for you to reduce social discontent in society. So I think, like in the United States, there's all sorts of conspiracy theories, right? There's talk of instigating a civil war in the United States. There's talk of Project Bluebeam, where they're trying to fake an alien invasion. There's talk of a collapse of the stock market and the cryptocurrency market in order to create a depression in the United States. So there's all these conspiracy theories. And I think all these are manifestations of elite anxiety of how to maintain control after COVID, right? Because COVID marked a major turning point in history, because now the people are like, the elite don't know what they're doing. They're incompetent, right? So now there's real desperation among the elite. So you had COVID, and you have the Epstein files, Epstein Island. You have the Biden presidency, when the American people stopped believing in the competence of the gerontocracy. So you have all these issues, and so for the American elite, it's really how do you navigate these issues using psychological warfare. If you're an enemy of the United States, or Russia specifically, it's how do you exaggerate these issues to create as much social discontent as possible in the United States. That's the nature of warfare today.
I think that's a very accurate depiction. I mean, everybody I talk to, especially the younger generations, are so discontent with any current U.S. leadership. They've lost faith in the system. It doesn't work for them anymore, and institutional trust among younger generations is at an all-time low. As a matter of fact, most libertarians tend to have very low institutional trust. I think that's why Javier Milei won in Argentina with his Liberty Advances party. And we're starting to see libertarian parties start to pop up around Latin America, in Europe, even in Russia, Cuba, and other countries, and a growing libertarian movement here at home. One thing I noticed, and I want to see if you agree with my thesis, it seems that there's rising socialism and rising, I don't know what exactly to call it, maybe far-right nationalism, or even kind of peeking behind the curtain at 20th century ideologies here in the United States and around the world. And so, it almost seems to me like we're polarizing more politically in the U.S. and perhaps in the West. We just had Mamdani, who's a socialist, elected in New York. And so do you see sort of extremes in politics with the next generation, and where do you think that's going to go? And is that a global phenomenon?
Yeah, I think in the United States, political polarization has reached a tipping point. And so I think my concern is there's no longer any unifying ideology. There's no longer any unifying institution. There's no unifying person or purpose, right? So, before you had the American dream, and now people recognize that it's dead. Like, the dream now is to get out of debt or stay out of debt, and that's impossible nowadays given the state of the economy. Before, there was a common enemy, maybe the Soviet Union, and now that America is the sole hegemon of the world, it's like, who do you fight? Well, if you can't fight anyone else, you fight each other, which is exactly what happened to the Roman Republic, right? Because after Rome defeated Carthage and the Macedonians and the Greeks, there's no one else to fight, so they just descended into civil war. So that's a real threat in the United States. These institutions that unified the nation before, including the judicial system, the media, the education institutions, right, the universities, they've all been discredited, right? You have the universities engaging in DEI for a long, long time, so they've lost your legitimacy, they've lost your authority. The media had TDS, Trump derangement syndrome, for a long, long time. So when Trump says they're fake news, they're literally the fake news now. I don't know about you, but I no longer read the New York Times. I don't think they're reliable anymore. So the media is gone. People don't watch TV anymore. People watch YouTube, and YouTube is like this balkanized world of media. The Supreme Court has become more right, and so the federal judiciary has become more partisan. These political parties, the Democrats and Republicans, are no longer able to agree to anything. You look at the government shutdown. Like no one knows when this will end. I mean, and it's been a long, long time, and now you have tens of millions of people who may starve because of the government shutdown, and no one's doing anything about it. So people have lost complete faith in authority and in the elite, and in this sort of like situation, what do you do about it, right? Well, I mean, like I'm sorry, but like you're kind of stuck.
Yeah, we're definitely in a state of gridlock, which can be good or can be terrible depending on the situation. It prevents both parties from advancing to some extent, but I think also as libertarians, we tend to view both parties as two heads of the same snake. They tend to agree on common issues when it comes to war, when it comes to spending, when it comes to sending military aid overseas, or for instance in COVID, they were both largely bipartisan in their reaction to COVID. And I was at least pleased with Trump recently. The Libertarian National Committee made a resolution about a year or two ago to exit the World Health Organization. We view that as a globalist entity that wants to take sovereignty over individual countries. So that was exited. But there's still so much that happened 5 years ago that we just haven't made up for it yet. And I think for a lot of people, it was a wake-up call to the psychology of government, and with a simple switch, they turned tyrannical. Even your local city council. So I think that for many people that was a huge wake-up call, and yeah, it's something that we hopefully won't repeat, but I think human nature plays a big role here.
Look, I think like these two parties, Democrats and the Republicans, they always agree on one thing, which is like how to crush any third parties from arising. Okay, yeah. It's a two-party monopoly, and honestly, they cheat all the time, and that's why it's hard for third and fourth parties to arise, and that's the root of a lot of issues. Another issue is the Democratic Party has become ossified. It's become corrupt. It only represents the PMCs, the professional management class in the coast. The only thing it's really good at doing anymore is quashing dissent, right? So, if Bernie Sanders won the nomination in 2016, the world would be very different. The Democratic Party would be very different, and I think American democracy would be much more vibrant. Remember, Trump won in a democratic manner, right? So the Republicans had a primary in 2016. It was a huge field, and Trump won by working hard, by having a message that resonated with as many people as possible, and by running the most innovative campaign. But Hillary Clinton won by cheating. And then Biden won by just sitting back and letting Obama do all the work. So the Democrats are a huge problem. And I would argue that the current state of the Democratic Party is the greatest threat to democracy, because Trump is intent on revolution. Project 2025, it is a political revolution, and they're very open and public about this, and they're doing a great job in implementing their vision. Like look at how they're transforming the federal bureaucracy, right? So at this particular moment in history, you need an effective opposition. You need the Democrats to have a grand vision to counter the Republican vision, and they don't. They simply don't. Their entire strategy is, we'll let things get worse and worse, and then next November we'll win the midterms, and then we'll beat Trump, and then we'll send Trump to prison. That's your entire strategy, and it's not going to work because Trump's not stupid, and Trump doesn't want to go to prison. So I think that given the way things are, given that the Democrats are so ineffective and so corrupt, I think I would bet that Trump gets a third term, actually.
you think he would be able to change the rules and try to go for a third term? Because I know there's some people out there that are really going for that. I know JD Vance is, of course, seems to be his next in line. Elon Musk is he was floating the idea of a third party. He seemed to back out of that idea. He seems to be supporting JD Vance for 2028 and maybe some Republicans in the midterms, but I'm not totally sure. I mean, do you actually see Trump trying to really go for a third term, and how would he try to pull that off? You think he would try to do something in the courts to make that happen?
Yeah, so I'm not optimistic about JD Vance, okay? Because like, just look at Mike Pence, right? Just go back to the first term and look at Mike Pence. Also, like, if you just go back and look at Trump's history, he's never had a protege. He never had. So the idea that he's going to let Vance take over from him in 2028, I think is preposterous. He doesn't have a history of doing this. So I think that Vance's political career will be stunted in some way. If you just look at this Charlie Kirk thing, JD Vance somehow got involved, right? I mean, people are making gossip about him and Erica Kirk, and it's just outrageous. But like, why is this happening, right?
Right.
So I think there are elements within the Trump camp that are trying to sabotage Vance before 2028, and it's all very subtle. I think Trump is intent on a third term. How he will do so, I don't know. So the most logical, the most obvious way is that if Trump runs as the presidential candidate, and his son Don or Eric, one of the two, runs at the top of the ticket as the president. And look, there are lots of legal loopholes here. There are lots of legal arguments, but ultimately it's the Supreme Court that decides, right? And guess what? The Supreme Court is run by the Republicans at this point. In fact, Trump appointed 3 of the 9 justices, right? So I think my guess is that Trump will run as the VP. And I would also guess that if that were the case, then Obama would run as a Democratic VP. So it would be a Trump-Obama show in 2028.
That would be very interesting.
This would be the greatest show on earth, okay? The entire world would watch the show. It would be the greatest show on earth. I would actually look forward to it.
I think, American politics, it must be really interesting for the rest of the world. Of course, we get a front row seat, but whatever happens here is extremely consequential everywhere else, of course. But it's probably the most entertaining at the very least. I did want to ask you what your thoughts were on Javier Milei. Javier Milei, he just won his second term. There was a lot of questions about his running again. He wasn't doing well in the polls. His party, the Libertarian Avanza Party, wasn't doing well, sweep the elections up, and did great. And it seems to me that the people of Argentina really, after decades of decay in Argentina, electing Milei, going through austerity, he was very upfront about it. It seems to be moving things around. So he's the first libertarian head of state. What are your opinions on Milei, and do you see the possibility of libertarianism growing in Latin America or around the world? And what do you make of Milei himself?
Yeah, so I'll be honest with you, I don't know much about Milei.
Gotcha.
But I think Argentina suffers from a parasitic bureaucratic state, right? And that's the source of all its problems. So the people would want to, like as Milei says, take a chainsaw and tear it all down. I think it makes a lot of sense. My issue is that in the Western Hemisphere, it's very hard to get things done without American approval. I think that unless you have the full support of the American deep state, it's very hard to get things done. And that's why I don't really follow South American politics, because I think a lot of decisions are actually made in Washington, D.C. and not locally. Yeah.
Okay. I did want to switch gears and ask you, because I know you've talked about this before. Why is it that there seems to be this obsession with supporting Israel? Why are so many American politicians in D.C. campaigning on Israel first? And it really America second, or really just having any country. I don't care. I'm Egyptian myself. I would never campaign on Egyptian first. It's my father's country. I consider myself an American. But what is going on here? Is the U.S. government that bought and paid for, and are there other countries that are like it? That are so influenced by other parts of the world? Or is it seems to me like Israel really is the the number one influence on a lot of politicians?
Okay, so I think there are different possibilities,
Okay.
and I'll just go over them. Okay, the first possibility is Washington D.C. is as corrupt as everyone thinks it is, right? Because Washington D.C., these politicians, they only serve the interests of lobbyists. If you pay them, they'll do something. If you don't pay them, they'll do nothing. Okay, the politicians in Washington D.C. have absolutely no concern for the national public interest, and so the Zionists have money, and they're willing to spend it on furthering Israeli interests. And so Washington D.C. it's bought and paid for by Zionist interests. Okay, that's one possibility. Second possibility is, going back to secret societies, Israel is a very important part of the eschatology. In fact, Israel for them is the center of the world, because that's where World War III will happen. That's where the Messiah will return, or the world government will be built. They want to build Solomon's temple. So for all these different secret societies, Israel is key. So so Israel is a pawn in the eschatology. Okay, that's the second explanation. The third explanation is something that I'm much more supportive of, which is this: Israel, the Jewish people, have always been a construct of empire. Okay, so if you just look at the map, historically, the Levant has been geopolitically the most strategic part of the world. Why? Because for most of history, Anatolia, Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Mediterranean, these four places were the four wealthiest places in the world and the center of all global trade. So if we control the Levant, it was basically the linchpin to the world, right? If you control the Levant, you control access to Egypt, you control access to Mesopotamia, to Anatolia. So it was a key region. And the way to govern Levant is through divide and conquer. You don't want ever a power to emerge in Levant, because that power could potentially consume the entire world because of its geopolitical situation. So the best way to control the Levant is by creating all these different minorities and having them fight each other all the time, which is what happened in history, right? So the first empire to conceive of this idea is the Persian Empire. So remember, at this time in history, this is about 500 BCE, the Jewish nation is gone. There's no more Israel. The Babylonians have destroyed it. And the Jewish elite, it's actually Israelite elite, okay? Jew is something that comes after the Persian Empire. So the Israeli elite are hostages in Babylon. They're not really hostages, actually. They've become absorbed into the Babylonian court system, okay, as scribes, as intellectuals. When Cyrus the Great took over Babylon, he needed to create conflict within the Levant, right? That's how the Persians ruled, through divide and conquer. So he told the Israelites, go back to the Levant and reconstitute your nation of Israel, and I'll support you. Why? It was divide and conquer, right? So, and we know this because, remember, in the Bible it says this: when the Israelites went back, they were disgusted because it seemed that Jews had assimilated with the local population. So the religion had been syncretic. It was polytheistic. Jewish men had married other Semitic women, and so it's a multicultural, multi-religious, peaceful area. And then the Persians said, we don't want this. So the Israelites said, okay, fine. What we'll do is we'll create a theocracy. And the first rule is that if you're a Jewish man, if you want to keep your faith, you have to divorce any non-Jewish person. Think about how traumatic that would be for families, right? You're literally bringing apart families, and this has never happened before in human history. I mean, this has ever happened before, and so this created a lot of conflict in the region. But that's the entire point of these policies: to create a fanatical religious elite that would only stir religious animosity within that area, which has historically been extremely tolerant, extremely diverse, extremely religious. Okay, and then after the Persian Empire, you had the Seleucid Empire, you had the Roman Empire. So that entire region is strategically very important, and so you want to create as much conflict as possible. So I would make the argument that if you look at the state of Israel today, it is a construct of the British Empire. If you look at Zionism, it's a construct of Christian Zionism, which was created by the British. And why did the British construct Christian Zionism and Zionism? As a way to destabilize the Ottoman Empire, right? Because the Ottoman Empire was a great threat to British interests in the Middle East. So, I think that Israel is really a construct of empire, of imperial interest. And so, in many ways, Israel is a pit bull for America, right? Because Israel causing all this problems, all this mayhem in the Middle East, it gives America plausible deniability, right?
Right.
So, when they go bomb Libya and Syria and Iraq and Afghanistan for the interest of central bankers, like, well, it's not us, it's the Israelis. It's all these Jewish interests in Washington, D.C. who are manipulating us.
It's a cat's paw.
Exactly. And Netanyahu keeps on saying this, for the past 20 years. He's like, we control America. We Jews control all, U.S. senators, and Epstein was a Mossad agent, and blah, blah, blah. Why is Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, saying this, which is against the interests of the state of Israel, right? If you are actually in control of America, would you admit this publicly? Well, I think it's because Netanyahu is an American asset. That's why. So I think these are three different possibilities. I prefer the third possibility because it explains a lot more than the first two possibilities. So yeah.
It makes a lot of sense. Trying to make sense of a lot of things the government does can be tough, and why they do it a lot of times, because we would hope that our politicians work for us and represent us, and if they were all good capitalists and free marketeers and everything else, pro individual freedom folks, but we're still trying to make sense of the whole landscape. Let's see. We touched on cryptocurrency for a bit. I did want to ask you because, in your opinion, cryptocurrency is such an interesting thing, and I have heard some speculation that perhaps Satoshi Nakamoto wasn't actually who he says he was. He, of course, somebody who disappeared. We don't know his true identity. He could be a group. He could be a number of people. And now I did hear from recently from I believe it was a Russian ambassador who said that the U.S. is planning to default on the debt and essentially move over to a cryptocurrency or a digital currency. The central bank, Federal Reserve, has been pushing central bank digital currencies for a long time. I believe the EU, European Central Bank, has been trying to do something similar, and it's already something that exists in some form in China. So in your opinion, because I've always been fascinated by cryptocurrencies, I've been involved in the industry from an early age, in my college years, and kind of dabbled in it. It seems to me that the genesis of cryptocurrency, which is Satoshi Nakamoto, it kind of goes unquestioned. It's like this big bang. Well, there was this white paper, and then Satoshi disappeared, and there's a lot of cryptocurrency held up in a wallet somewhere that's worth billions of dollars, and maybe he was a hikikomori and just died and nobody knew. Maybe he was the NSA. We don't know. What is your opinion both on cryptocurrency, and I'd be curious what your opinion is on central bank digital currencies as well? I mean,
yeah. So listen, I mean, Satoshi Nakamoto, in Japanese, it literally translates into central intelligence, right? Or central wisdom, central intelligence, basically. So if you just analyze it from first principles, okay? 2008, this white paper is launched, and the blockchain is launched. Okay, now you have certain questions. The first question is, who have the resources to build the blockchain? Because people say it's decentralized, but at the end of the day, all software runs on hardware. Okay, so who's paying for the servers? Who's paying for the fiber optic networks? Who where's the hardware stored? Okay, that's number one. Number two is why would someone do this? What incentive, what motive would someone have to do this? Okay, and the third thing is, why would someone keep his identity secret, right? Because if you spend all your time building this thing, wouldn't you want to be like a billionaire, right, or a trillionaire? So if you just look at these three questions and you just do some first principle thinking, the only logical conclusion is that the people who built this is probably DARPA, the Defense Research Agency of the Pentagon. Why? Because the DARPA built the internet, they built GPS. Okay, then you're like, who would want to use this? And the answer is CIA and NSA, because they fund all these terrorist organizations, they fund all these drug smugglers around the world, and they need a mechanism to do so, right? And the third is, why would they keep it secret? And the answer is to create value, right? Because if you believe it's the Pentagon who created this, no one's going to touch this thing. But if you think that it's decentralized and it's anonymous and it's forever safe, and the government can never touch this, then you would invest in it. Okay. So one key is that the Winklevoss twins, right? They sued Mark Zuckerberg because their claim is that Facebook was their idea and Mark Zuckerberg stole it from him. This court case dragged on for like years and years, and they could afford it because their father was a hedge fund manager. And they got like a $60 million settlement. They invested like a third of that, or something along the lines. I don't know the exact numbers, into Bitcoin when Bitcoin was like a few cents, right? Why would you do that? Why would you spend that much money on Bitcoin? No one else did that, and today they're billionaires. So clearly they had some inside information that no one else did, because your father is a hedge fund manager, right? It's a rigged game. So I think Bitcoin is a deep state project that has worked tremendously well. It allows the CIA and other deep state actors to money launder, but more importantly, it allows these state actors to have constant surveillance over the most nefarious elements of the world, including North Korea, right? So it makes perfect sense for Bitcoin to have been invented by the NSA or DARPA or whichever deep state actor. That said, I still think digital currency is the future, because I live in China and our society has digital currency. The reason why is we have digital ID, right? So you need digital ID before you can have digital currency. Otherwise, it sort of defeats the purpose. So we have digital ID, and so it's very easy, almost seamless, to transition into digital currency. It's made life remarkably fast and frictionless for everyone, right? So like, I don't carry cash anymore. I no longer have to worry about having my cash stolen or losing my wallet or whatever. I just pay everything online. You can do all sorts of like really complex transactions very easily nowadays. So it's a tremendous convenience. The problem is that it's not a problem in China, because there's no freedom in China anyway, right? But in America, you're just used to having certain freedoms, like the right to speak your mind. Well, it could be a problem, because digital currency is programmable. They can control your behavior by controlling how you spend your money. And so digital currency, it's really the mark of the beast, right? I mean, it's really the integration of all libertarian principles, and I think that's the future. The problem, though, is that for digital currency to gain popularity, you need a crisis. You need to manufacture a crisis, otherwise people will refuse to accept it, right? So COVID was a good opportunity, because everyone was sick at home and they had to like order food, they had to do all these transactions online. So COVID was an opportunity, and it's possible they manufacture another crisis in order to basically roll out digital currency. Certainly, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, all heavily invested in this idea. Palantir would benefit a great deal from digital currency. So it's very dystopian, right? I mean, the idea of like losing your right to speak, losing your right to speak your own opinions. I mean, it's really the corruption and the degradation of the human soul, I think.
It's something that libertarians, of course, hold very near and dear, is this ability to be able to transact using currency. And the Treasury just recently stopped minting pennies because it costs 3 times as much to mint a penny than it is to than what the actual face value of it is. Of course, that's an issue of inflation, but I think we are heading towards digital currencies. I think with credit cards and Apple Pay and everything else, we haven't been forced to yet, but if they start phasing out currency because it's worthless, it may force us into a cashless society, which of course, experiencing COVID and even just reading Revelations, I think starts to move the imagination. And as we enter this sort of Minority Report style with Palantir, the pre-crime, this seems to be something that may come up. I did want to ask you about AI and the importance of AI. I think Putin at one point had mentioned that the country that wins the AI race will essentially author the future, paraphrasing a bit. That AI seems to be extremely important. I don't even fully grasp without monumental of a change AI will bring to society. I can see it. I've used ChatGPT and these other services. They're profound, but I think we're looking ahead. There's probably orders of magnitude increase in its impact on society. How do you think AI is going to impact society over the next several years, and how are governments going to be utilizing AI?
Yeah, so AI is a very big thing because it's a psyop, right? So let me explain why. Okay, first of all authority is breaking down, right? The media, you no longer trust the media, you no longer trust universities, so you need a new institution to legitimize your authority, to control people, to brainwash people, right? And that makes sense, right? So because I mean, like when you talk to ChatGPT, you think, okay, well, this must be an AI, so it must be objective, and people fall for this crap. Okay, so AI is a very important psyop for the government. Also, the economy is not doing well. And a lot of it is the over-bureaucratization of society, where corporations have too many people, government has too many people. So how do you justify laying off all these people that are redundant? Well, you say AI. Sorry, man, it's not us, it's AI. Even though AI doesn't really do anything. So you look at Twitter, right? I mean, like when Musk came in, he fired like thousands of employees, and he had like a skeleton crew, and Twitter's still fine because like once you set up these complex organizations and software, you don't really need that many people to run them, right? So AI, it allows for the laying off of millions of people. And so you can shift blame. It's not us, the managers, it's the AI system that's taking over. So that's the second thing. And the third thing is that AI allows for the greater concentration of wealth, right? Because what is AI? AI is basically data centers. And so it allows the government to consolidate not just wealth, but also information. The problem with data centers, of course, is that they're prohibitively expensive. They consume a community's entire electricity and fresh water. And so AI may destroy the environment. But from the government's perspective, it's a very important psyop. In fact, it's basically the last hope, right? Because like how else are you going to brainwash people? Like people are waking up. People now are much more informed. They're much more capable of their own independent thought than previously. And so you need a new mechanism to start gaslighting people, to start brainwashing people, and that would be AI.
I think one thing is absolutely for sure too. As AI increases its usefulness, these tariffs, these supposed jobs that are coming back to the United States, there's not jobs coming back. I think it's all automation.
That's right.
And I don't think people fully realize that yet. In just about every industry, they're trying to cut labor due to inflation. And if the U.S. is supposedly going to compete with China, which I'm not sure if that's possible or not, in terms of manufacturing, it's going to require an AI revolution, and I think that's probably where we're headed. And I think a lot of people are going to be put out of a job. I'm not sure what the societal impacts of that are going to be, but they're not going to be pretty.
That's why you need war, right?
Yeah.
You've got like all these like millions of unemployed people. Where do you send them? You send off to war, right?
Problem solved.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's. I mean, it seems to be all lining up to head in that direction. I just have a few questions left for you as we come up on our hour. First, we'll start with geopolitics. Where do you see any major global conflicts over the next few months or the next few years? We'll start off there.
Yeah, so I think this Ukraine thing will continue to escalate. I think that eventually you will converge in Odessa. So I think Ukraine will always be a global flashpoint. I think that eventually the United States and Israel will attack Iran. I don't know the timeline. It could be soon. I've heard rumors of like by December, which is very fast, okay? But it's entirely possible they move it back until like next spring or whatever, okay? So I see these as two major flashpoints. I do not see Taiwan as a flashpoint. I think that both China and the United States are status quo powers. They're very heavily invested in a global financial system that an invasion of Taiwan would destroy globalization. I mean, because AI is going to be run off semiconductors manufactured in Taiwan, right? It's just one company. It's absolutely ridiculous how everyone relies on this one company in Taiwan manufacturing all these chips. And China doesn't really benefit from basically torpedoing the global economy. It got wealthy because of the global economy. So I think both China and the United States are heavily invested in trying to make the world as peaceful and prosperous as possible. And I think that when Trump visits China, which is scheduled for next April, you will see major rapprochement between China and the United States. Already, we're seeing some rapprochement. Like nowadays, you have these major neocons coming out and say, like maybe China could be our friend because Russia's our enemy, right? Maybe it's not that smart to fight all these wars on different fronts. Right? If we're going to fight wars in Ukraine and Iran and Venezuela and Nigeria or wherever, like let's not fight this war in the Taiwan Strait, right? So, so I think Taiwan will not be an issue, and in fact, I think that we'll see a gradual improvement in U.S.-China relations. But I think North Korea could be an issue because North Korea would benefit a lot from causing all this mayhem in Southeast Asia, right? And all North Korea has to do is threaten artillery strikes against Seoul. Right, because all of South Korea is basically 30 minutes away from an artillery strike from North Korea. So, and then North Korea could financially benefit, right? I mean, it's basically extortion. So I think North Korea could be a flashpoint as well. But and I think civil war in the United States, I think civil war in Europe will be very likely scenarios in the next 2 to 3 years, especially as we approach the 2028 election. I predict that after 2028, you will have massive civil discontent in the United States because whoever wins, half the country will be upset. And I think we've reached a breaking point where people are just no longer willing to put up with this anymore. People are just disgusted with everything that's going on. With AI, people are going to lose their jobs. Government shutdown means people are going to starve. I mean, the conditions are being set for a major conflict within the United States. That's my fear.
I think, unfortunately, you're right about that. I see that almost all hope has been lost in the political system at this point. There are, wins, ground being gained by some in certain areas, but as a whole, the problem just seems too large in some cases to really resolve, especially when we talk about the federal government specifically. I always think there's work that can be done at the local level, but when you have somebody like a Thomas Massey, for instance, or a Justin Amash or a Rand Paul, who says, look, we're not going to vote for the big, beautiful bill, he gets primaried by the Republican establishment. So clearly, even among the GOP or conservatives or libertarian-leaning conservatives or libertarians who may have supported the GOP, we can see that internal divide, and it's very stark when it's brought to the surface, because here's somebody who they thought they were voting for this on a wider scale, and guess what, they're not. and the establishment wants to remove that person. So I think there's a lot of splintering within both the GOP, the Democrats, and really at macro level, the United States as a whole. And that kind of leads to my next question, which is, in a general sense, where do you see sort of the spiritual battle? It seems to be affecting Europe and even China as well as the United States to some degree. There's a lot of young people. I think the Gen X and Gen Alpha, or excuse me, Gen Z and Gen Alpha, and of course the millennials as well that have already got the head start into it, that are statistically they're at the lowest level of institutional trust. Are we going to see an awakening? Do you see hope? What's your interaction been with the youth, and what do you see is the way out of it, or will there be a sort of spiritual revolution or intellectual revolution?
Yes, that's a great question. So thank you for it. What has made America great is the American character, right? And American values: freedom, courage, independence, right? Rugged individualism, the frontier thesis, right? So that's what's made America great, and that's what continues to make America great. Unfortunately, these young people have been brainwashed to think that freedom's not important, safety is important, right? That's why you have DEI, safety is what's important, safetyism. And it's degraded the American character. And so I think it is a spiritual battle. I think that freedom is what gives people purpose and life. And without it, then they're basically zombies, right? And I know this because I live in China. So people have to strive for freedom. It's not given to you anymore, right? And so young people nowadays, if they are to be free, they have to fight for it. They have to start thinking for themselves. And COVID was a big test. I mean, like if you were able to maintain your independence during COVID, then you'll be much more resilient for the tribulations coming ahead. So I believe there are tribulations coming ahead. So I think that those who are resilient, those who are independently minded, those who believe in freedom, they're much more likely to survive than those who believe in safetyism, right? Who are conformists, who are obedient. So it is a battle, and it's an internal individual struggle, right? It's a question of like, these crises are coming. There's no way to prevent them, and if you are aware of these crises, and if you are aware of the root of these crises, if you strive for industrial freedom, then you'll be much more likely to survive and to thrive in this new era that we're heading towards.
No, I think that's absolutely right on. I think so many people around the world, not even just Americans, have forgotten what it means to be free, or what it is to strive to be free. And why would they even want to be free? I think freedom leads to self-actualization, and I think self-actualization is very dangerous to the elite. And you can squash that by keeping people in line. The last question I had for you, Professor, since we're talking about your YouTube channel's Predictive History, is what are some books or historians that you admire that inspired you? I'm a big student of history, from the Great Depression to Niccolo Machiavelli. I think he's got a bad rap. Sun Tzu, a lot of great thinkers that revolutionized politics. Yeah, of course, Murray Rothbard, Bastiat, Ludwig von Mises, of course, from the libertarian side. But there's so much history to explore. What tools and books and philosophies has helped you to do what you do?
Yeah, so my favorite historical book of all time is The Peloponnesian War by Thucydides. It's something that you can read over and over because it's just a complex work. But it's an amazing work because it's so objective, right? Because Thucydides, he was an Athenian general. So you would think that it would just be propaganda. But, he talks trash about Athens. So, it's one of those great qualities about the Greeks of that time. They saw themselves as citizens of the world. They really didn't identify tribally. They really tried to strive for a human consciousness. So I think Thucydides, the Peloponnesian War, is definitely worth reading. It's highly entertaining. The only problem is that it's a very complex work, and you have to spend years trying to figure out what he's really saying. But he's so honest that it's a treasure trove of information about how we behave, about what drives history. So that I would recommend. I would also recommend Peter Turchin. He has a concept called elite overproduction, and he's written quite a few books based on this idea that what drives historical change is actually conflict within nations, especially among the elite. An empire always reaches a point where you have too many elite, and they're just parasites, and so they're fighting over who gets to be the parasite. And that's why you have civil wars. That's what explains the French Revolution. That's what explains the Roman Republic, the fall of the Roman Republic, the rise of Julius Caesar. So I highly recommend Peter Turchin. There's a British historian, Anthony Beevor, Beevor. He's written lots of really interesting books about World War II. That's worth picking up. And he's really entertaining. These British historians, I will have to say, they are great writers. They are really interesting storytellers. Basically, I think anything by a British historian is worth picking up because it's so entertaining. So yeah, I mean, those would be my recommendations.
Well, fantastic, Professor. This has been really fun, very, very insightful. I think our audience is really going to enjoy this. Did you have anything else you wanted to say or mention or talk about, or do you have any questions for me?
No, I mean, it's been so much fun. These are great questions. It seems that a lot of values are aligned, and we went really deep into certain topics. So I really hope we can do this again sometime.
That'd be fantastic. Professor, thank you so much. And I look forward to continuing to follow your work.
Thank you.